Hello guys, how are we doing and welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be all about Vault, Hardpoint and how to hold the hills most efficiently whilst keeping spawns and making sure you know where the enemies are coming from at all times and you've got every area of the map covered. Vault has been one of the maps where people loved it at the start, but people seem to be voting it out more and more frequently, especially for Hardpoint. And it's because a lot of the time they're being broken and their team can't quite hold the objective. So whether you're a quad stack, trio queuer, duo queuer or a solo queuer, this video is going to help you understand where you need to hold, what lanes you need to cut, and make sure where you need to be to block the spawns. This isn't going to be an overall spawn guide. Obviously, I have a whole completely different spawn guide series which I've done in the past. If you want a link to that, feel free to just let me know and I'll give you a link to the Vault one. But if you struggle with Hardpoint on Vault and you're not entirely sure where you need to be most efficient, this video is most definitely going to be for you. And even if you think you have mastered Vault, perhaps you've got a squad who you scrim with or something like that, and you want some ideas for setups, this video is going to be for you. Before we get into it, the diagrams you have here are going to have players in very precise places, but the logic, I'm hoping to convey the logic behind them so that it's not quite as rigid as I'm saying here. The main thing is you're holding the right spawns, you've got someone pushed out towards the enemy spawn, and you've got most lanes covered, or the most probable lanes covered. So let's kick it off with P1 here. On Vault, you've got, just for reference, the pool is here, P4's here, P1's here, you've got like the books back here, ammo that's up here, and that should give you an idea of where the map is. So we're taking the perspective of the red team here, so the team who are spawning on this right-hand side. Now, you've got a player top gold, or top ammo, whatever you want to call it. You have a player catwalk, a player on time, and a player push through into lights. Now, what you can see here is that this player is specifically blocking this spawn. So the two spawns are in this position. You've got two, the red team, one back top gold and one bottom cat, and they're essentially blocking these three red spawns back here, which will stop the enemy from spawning here. And you want to keep these spawns really because P2 is in this yellow area here, as you can see. So both of these players are positioned so that the enemy can't flip. What that enables this player to do is push a little bit forward over the hard point towards the enemy spawn, and because they're sort of lent towards the left hand side of that light room, they're blocking this bottom spawn, meaning that you know the enemies are going to be spawning top up here. Okay, so this is what the setup is, but let's see what the players are holding. Let's see what players are, where are they essentially. So we're starting at the top here. The player on gold is going to be an IR player. They're watching the whole of this right-hand side. With the enemy spawning in art, they're likely to run right around this left side, whether to flank or to get to P2 spawns, but this player's make sure they can't do that with an AR. We have the other player who's blocking in catwalk. They should really have a trophy at their feet, but they really need to try and play their life. They're being really difficult. They don't over push. They're on this the stairheady, looking over catwalk and making sure, again, with an AR, an enemy can't get a good look over P1, and it's essentially, again, another lane covered from here. You then have the player push through lights, ideally with a sub. So they don't necessarily have to be in this left corner, but if they're in this left corner, the enemy's likely to spawn right. As this player moves from left to right or backs up a little bit, the spawns will change for the blue team. So that's why it's important to have players on both sides. But in this current position where they're on this left, the enemies are going to be spawning back right, all right? And they'd have a sub, but it's their job to sort of own that light room area. That's their responsibility. And then finally you have the player who's getting time, but they're not completely useless. So you've got the left, the middle, and the right sort of covered, but there's one route they don't have covered, and it's the underground route through the vault. And player on the hill can have a sub and watch underneath at the same time. They can see that from being on the hill. And that's the primary lines of sight for each of those players. But let's say we wanted to shift it up a bit. There is room for to maneuver around the map, okay? So if you feel like this player was getting a little bit overwhelmed at lights, they can back up. You can have a player sat on time looking at the left-hand side of lights. You can have a player backed up into right behind the desks, and they're looking at the right line of sight. And then the top player can continue to watch that, to be fair. If they really want to, they can watch the cross the back, but it's not going to be essential. And then finally, again, you have the player in catwalk who can back up off of the steps and watch the pool every so often, okay? It doesn't need to be every time, but their main priority from this catwalk should be to look at the catwalk every 5 or 6 seconds or so, take a look at the pool, make sure no one's flanked around the whole left route, and you should be absolutely good. And in this position, it's a really solid hold. You've got all lanes covered. The only thing that is a little bit risky in this position is anyone can go under vault, and there's not a person specifically watching that, but the player who's catwalk should be able to pick that up at some point. But let's say you want to hold it from the other side for whatever reason. Okay, you can win on this hill. You don't want to flip because it can be a little bit too unpredictable. You want to make it so that the enemies are guaranteed to spawn this right-hand side of the map here. So we're taking the perspective of the blue team here, and you've got a player out left on the pillars, making sure the enemy can't push the left. You then have a player on P1, a player pushed a little bit past P1, and then a player top nest. Now, there's no real person blocking or pushing through these spawns, so when you get these kills, the chances of a flip might be likely. But that's absolutely fine. You're happy to hold this position, wait for the enemies to push, get the kills, push through the end, then you'll flip, and then you can take the position of what the red team were doing a minute ago. But from this area, you can see the player on the left-hand side is just making sure the enemies can't come left. They're on the pillar. They're making sure that the enemies can't push through this left-hand side here. The player on time is watching front with the assistance of the player pushed a little bit through time. It's a similar setup to what it was for the red team, but just flipped on the other side. And again, this player who's playing this close angle should really have a sub. This player is a little bit too far back to have a sub. They'll probably lose a gunfight to an AR, so they'll probably have an AR. And then finally, you've got the player top nest watching the catwalk push from the nest, again, with an AR, I'd likely assume. Again, there are some alternative angles you can take as these players. Unfortunately, the player on the street is pretty rigid. There's not much more they need to watch. This is the lane, and they're owning the lane. That is what it is. But the players on the hill can change around a little bit. So the player on who was originally with a sub can lay down at the front of time to get the hill time. The player who was at the back of time with an AR can move to the desks and watch the cross section. But you can see here they've got the front covered, they've got the left covered, and they're going to have the right covered. So this player number 4, as well as watching the catwalk, they can also watch the push around to pool if they want to stop the red team from getting too much map control over this palm side before P2 pops. But as I say, gets to the end of P1, you're holding these positions, you're getting the kills because you've got a really good solid leak-proof setup. Once you get the original initial kills, the enemies will then spawn out. You can then push through and then take up the position of this, but from the other side, okay? And then you will then have the P2 spawns. So P2 looks a little bit like this. So P3 is up here, which is why it's marked yellow, just so that it's in the back of your head where the next hill is. And the main spawns here are back ammo. You'll have one pretty much library, and then one back scaff to the side of P4. Now, there's a couple of people manipulating the spawns here. First of all, you've got a player who's sat on the back of the truck. They are in that position blocking this back spawn. Okay, you need to be inside of this spawn in order to block it. If you suddenly don't, you can't turn around and see it from whatever position you're in, that will no longer be blocked. So you have to be able to turn and see that spawn in order to block it. You don't necessarily have to be looking at it, but just being in the vicinity of being able to look at it, being able to do that will block it. You've then got a couple of players. One's pushed up towards the other side of the pool, and one's topped the top of the catwalk. And as I say, from this position, that player, which is why they've got the little blue ring around them, is blocking the closest spawn. So the two spawns for this blue team are scaff and library or books. And because, first of all, this player is blocking this spawn, and this player is blocking this close spawn, they've spawned all the way out. So as you can see, that's a real long distance to the hill, which is what you want to go for. You want to spawn the enemies at the furthest possible way out. But where are they watching from these positions, okay? So the player on time isn't being completely useless. They're watching the left-hand side of the heady. They're not chowing the heady. They're just making sure if anyone comes out from this blue team to chow that heady or to move past that heady, player number on the hill is going to have some influence on that gunfight. You've then got a player sat under the catwalk, and again, they're watching something similar. So if this player gets whoever chows out from the blue team slightly weak, this player who's close pool can somewhat cut it off. They can be using a sub if they wish. An AR can also work, but a sub can be a little bit more versatile because a sub could jump up to the nest and be, move around a bit, play the diving board heady, all sorts. Player number 7 is watching the hop up through the little window, but they're also making sure that player can't through catwalk. In the angle they've got them here, which you can see in the screenshot, they're sat back a little bit into that little divot into the catwalk, meaning that a player can simply run past them if they don't see them. But they're also going to be accountable for anyone coming catwalk. And if they die, communicate that someone's catwalk, and then the team can adjust as so. But they can be using a sub, they can be using an AR, whatever suits them. It doesn't really matter. A sub probably would be better, so long as these players back here with ARs do their job. So the main viewpoint from a player who's blocking the spawn and on the truck is going to be the flip. It's going to be the pinch. Sorry, you can see here the main focus of these gunfights are this area of the map. But if a teammate from the blue side decides to go through middle, no one's watching it, and it'll be a really easy way to break this setup. So as a result, because you've got so many players already focused on this left-hand side here, the player who's blocking the spawn is just watching the pinch, okay, as they can be influential that way, as well as blocking the spawn. But obviously, it's not rigid. Some alternative line of sights in this position can happen. So say, for example, got a bit ahead a little bit. Say, for example, this player can overlook the pool at sometimes if they wish. It's not a problem as long as they're not pushed too far around so that they're not blocking the spawn anymore. So if these guys struggle at this side, this player can then push through. Let's say, for example, player number 7 dies. This player can then pick up the catwalk. This player spawns in and then holds this position. And it's like a rotation sort of thing. Now, when it gets to the end of P2, you're going to really want the spawns back here for P3 and P4. So realistically, trying to keep these spawns toward the ends of P2 isn't so much of an issue. So once you've got these kills and you're happy to push forward, as soon as you unblock this spawn, the enemies will start to spawn behind you, okay? So in an ideal world, this doesn't look right, it's a bit too bright. In an ideal world, this is what will happen towards the end of P2. You let the enemies spawn back here, let them have the longest route to the good spawns, whilst you maintain the better spawns for P3 and P4. But in essence, you've got because no one is blocking this back spawn here, because no one can see that spawn. That's the main important thing. As long as nobody on the blue team is looking at the spawn, the red team will always spawn there, no matter how far pushed back they are, how far pushed forward they are. As long as they can't see this area here, you won't say that area here. You're not going to be blocking it. So the red team is spawning there. So the only spawn manipulation is nobody's blocking it, so they're spawning it. That's why there aren't any rings around the players specifically. You've got a player top nest, a player on time, a player on trees, and a player on this closer heady. But what are they watching? I'm going to start bottom right. This player is literally watching the main back side of this spawn. This is probably going to be the most common push from the enemies, so that's why you've got a couple people looking this way. This player's just got to try and play their life. Have a trophy at their feet, snake a little bit if they can do, not abusively, but maybe with an arrow in their hands, just be a little bit annoying, be hard to kill. And a worst case scenario, if they get weak, lay down, because you can see the person on time here has got their push, so they can assist. The person on time can actually assist on the enemy's push to this player if they just want to lay down and just, hide just to play their life a little bit. So yeah, as I say, the player on time, ideally with a sub gun, so the KSV or the Jackal, they're watching the back door as basically assisting this player back heady. You've then got two other players, one on the palms, essentially watching the front push. So if anyone from the red team decides to pinch the time from the front, this is being watched, and then the player top nest can also watch the front at the same time. So you've got two watching the pinch, two watching that side. It should be a pretty good setup. Depending on what rank you are, you'll find a lot of people in the lower ranks tend to just blindly push the back of the hill over and over again. So if that is the case, if you are a little bit lower ranked and you feel like in your lobbies people tend to put a little bit more emphasis on the block, there are some alternative to this backside. There are some alternative lines of sight if you wish. So you can see here, again, this player's only really role is to watch this back door. You can have this player, top nest, watch the back door as well. The player number 2, as again with a sub, can watch the front if they need to. The player on the palm heady can either watch the push into hall, or in fact they have a nice line of sight to that back door as well. So not only is this player watching the back door, you've got the player nest watching the back door, you've got the player here watching the back door if they want. So realistically, if you feel like the enemy team are just flooding the back door, you can have all 4 people watching that side, and then just rely on this nest person to maybe pick up the flank if you want. But that's the ideal set for P2 from both sides, depending on how you want to play it. Again, depends on how much time is left on that hill. So we're looking at P3 now. We're going to take the position of the blue team. You really want these back spawns for P3 because it's really easy to set up and have them spawn all the way out. And also it saves you from rotating and getting the better spawns for P4 as well, because the P4 is here, as you can see. So if you can keep these back spawns here, you're looking pretty good. So to stop the enemy, the red team from spawning back here, this player is situated top art. They are blocking this back spawn, so they need to stay alive. If they die and the enemies die, and the enemy spawning first, the enemies will spawn here because this player is no longer alive. You then have a player who is on time, player in middle, watching the middle push, and then finally you have a player who's pushed out all the way deep palms. Again, because of how far they've pushed up, they're blocking this closer spawn. The enemies aren't spawning here because this player's pushed up so far, and the enemies are now caused to spawn all the way here, which is a little bit further to the objective, which is a real nice position to be in. So yeah, this setup happens. The enemies spawn here rather than here, simply because of this player and this player blocking this back spawn, which I hope is quite clear. So where are they watching? Where can they watch? So the player who is blocking the closer red spawn is basically watching the cut. So a lot of the times the enemies will spawn in and run forward. And if that's the case, this enemy is you're going to have that picked out. The blue player is going to pick that up. You've then got the player on time who's watching the bottom push. So if this player needs to stay down and just play the life of it, you do have a look over cover from the player on time itself. Again, every player here can ideally have an AR. This is it's a real heavy AR hill because of the line of sights involved. So if you're a sub player and you're struggling to be important or impactful, maybe just pull out an AR for this hill. You then have a player in middle, making sure the enemies, because they spawn relatively central across the map, they're likely to want to run through middle to pinch time, whether they go all the way around or through the mid doors. But this player's there essentially making sure they can't do that. And then finally, you've got a player who is not only blocking, they're making sure the enemy can't come all the way around. A lot of people, especially if you get up to really good ranks, the red team will understand that they need the P4 spawn. So a lot of the time, they like to rotate early all the way around the left. So having this player here, make sure they're picking that up, is really important to have, especially, as I say, at those lobbies where people do want to try and flip the spawns. They don't need to look over. They've got enough emphasis at the moment. But if they want to, there are some alternative lines of sights. So there's a lot here. So this player pushed up onto the palms, as well as watching just the main cut. As we saw, they can watch top gold, they can watch the hall push, they can watch the mid door push. The player on time can watch the top gold push, and as well as the mid door push. And the player who was middle can assist on time if they want, as you can see. And the player top art not only can hold this push from here, they can also look at mid line, they can look at the vault push, the vault pinch, sorry, they can look at the vault, just the front push. There's a lot of line of sight so everyone can see here, but the important thing is you've got a player pushed out and you've got a player held all the way back, making sure that they do spawn all the way over here. So yeah, there's some ideal setups that I would advise having to get the best amount of hill time for P3. So P4 can also be a really, really, really important money hill to have on this map. You've got a couple of people influencing spawns here. So just for reference, you've got a person top art, you've got a person lion, a player the backside of P4, which is really important. They need to be on that backside of P4 to block this spawn properly, or guarantee it that it is blocked with these players in this position. So that's that. This player here, whilst being on time, is 1, getting time, and 2, blocking the back spawn, which is a really important role to have. And then finally, you have a player who's top nest blocking this closer spawn. Now, if this player top nest wasn't there and they pulled all the way back a little bit, the enemies would, instead of spawning here, which is the way they are spawning, they would spawn here. So it's important that this player does push up to this amount, this area. To be fair, they can be anywhere here and it will block this spawn. And that basically gets the enemy spawning back P1 sort of side. So where are they watching? Where's the blue team watching here? So first of all, you'll notice this player on the hill isn't really doing much, but they're essentially, just in case someone somehow leaks through, they're just going to be watching the back door, just in case. You know, it's unlikely for it to happen, but they may as well watch something if they're on the hill and they're on that back side of the hill. The player top art is watching the vault push a lot of the times, and the P3 push a lot of the times, especially early in this hill. Players spawn hall and they want to push around the right just to try and flank the hill. So this player is basically making sure they can't do that. The player lion is watching the push through lights, and the player nest is watching the push through catwalk. Again, some people, especially in those higher ranks, spawn P1, and instead of just running forward, they want to take a little bit of a route to get to the hill. So that's what that player there is responsible for, as well as blocking the spawn. Alternatively, I know a lot of pressure can go elsewhere and it doesn't always play out like this, so there are some alternative line of sights these players can have. So obviously the player in hill can also watch the side door if they wish, and the player top arc can also watch the pinch from the pool side as easy as they can the front. The player who was blocking nest, who was in the nest, can back up towards square and instead, or lobby, whatever you want to call it, and instead watch the pinch through P1. And the player who was in line can also maneuver their way to the other side of that, and essentially they've got a nice little team shot area here. If the enemies run from here all the way into middle, they've got 2 people shooting at them. And because this player's pushed out this right hand side of the hill and they're in sort of, if I draw a box as to where they can be in this area, the enemies are no longer spawning here, they're still spawning in middle. Okay, now if you want a super aggressive approach to these hills, and this is a risky setup because you have to be really perfect in where the blocker is positioned, you can actually have the enemies spawn all the way back P2, which is obviously the furthest possible spawn point out of these 3. In most cases, this is going to be unlikely to happen unless you've got a really well-coordinated, well-oiled team. The enemy's either going to be spawning here or here, and ideally, as I say, you'd want a setup similar to this, so the enemy spawn here, because it's a little bit more of an easy defense if they're just simply running through middle. But let's say you've got a really well-oiled squad and you're playing people who are significantly worse than you. You can have a really ambitious setup like this. So first of all, you've got a player designated to blocking, and they literally need to be in the block spots so the enemies don't spawn here. So that's what they're doing. Their only objective here is to pretty much block. So that's what this player back here is doing. You then have the player getting time, and then you have two players who are blocking both this pool spawn and the hall spawn, or P1 spawn, by being in top catwalk as well as in nest. And as a result, because that spawn are all blocked, the enemy spawn back P2. So it's a real nice setup to have if you can get it. I've only managed to get it a handful of times since playing ranked, and obviously ranked has been out for ages, and it was really in those lower ranks. So it's a hard setup, but if you can get it down to this, it'd be really, really nice. But whilst they're watching this, the two in the back don't have to be completely useless. The player blocking the deep spawn can literally watch the full flank if they want to. It's something to watch. It's unlikely that these red teams are going to go all around the map, although Vault is quite small, so they can do. The player on time can watch the side door. And then the two players that are going to be getting all the kills in this setup are going to be the player top catwalk, who's watching the push through trees, and then the player top nest is going to be watching the catwalk push as well as the pool push. Like so, and that's a real nice setup. Again, it's super ambitious. I wouldn't aim for this. If you can get into this, it is really, really nice, and you can really guarantee 60 seconds. I would be just as happy if everyone playing Hardpoint, this setup is just as good as any. And if you're solo queuing and you're not sure how you can coordinate your team, the logic is you've got every lane accounted for. You've got the right accounted for. You know they're spawning middle, so you don't really have to put so much emphasis on the right. A lot of the emphasis needs to be around this building. So as long as you've got the left pinch covered, the front covered, and the right covered, you should be looking good. Vault's one of those maps where you can win by such a large margin because of where the spawns are and how easily you can see the cuts from those spawns. So that'll do it for me from now. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you found it useful, don't forget to sub, like, comment, give me your feedback if there's things you think could be improved upon, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao for now.